Okay, and we're live. Hi, everyone. My name is Rochelle Fernandez, and I'm a doctoral student at the University of San Francisco. I'm getting my doctoral in clinical psychology, and May 24th is World Schizophrenia Awareness Day. And so I decided to make a video to share some information about this condition, just to increase all of our awareness and understanding. If you see any information in here that you don't agree with or that you have better data on, please leave me a comment and leave me the name of the researcher where you found alternate data, the researcher's last name, and also the year, so I can look up that publication and improve and increase my own understanding about this condition as well. And I hope you find this interesting. And if there are any other disorders, diagnoses, etc., that you would like me to cover or talk about or make videos about, leave me that in the comments as well. And I will do my best to make one for you, or at least to look it up if I don't know much about it. Okay. So with that, let me begin sharing. Hopefully you all can see my screen. Okay. So first, let's start at the very beginning, right? As they say. So what is schizophrenia? So schizophrenia is one of the most serious among all of the psychotic disorders. In the DSM-5, disorders are broken out, by category, and one of those categories is psychotic. The psychotic category, which is characterized with things such as cognitive difficulties, cognitive deteriorations for varied amounts of time. And it's primarily the amount of time, and the severity is what lends itself to sort of where in that spectrum someone falls. But however, this one, schizophrenia, is the most serious among all of them. It is a chronic condition, and why that matters is because it's not something that is sort of episodic with a trigger per se. Now there may be milder versions that are within the psychotic disorders category, such as brief psychotic episode, which is an episode. It's not chronic. So it's important to note that it is chronic, sort of like diabetes is chronic. This is a chronic condition. It is a brain illness, and that is incredibly important to understand. There are differences and deteriorations that occur within the brain, and in certain sides, and this is very important because the same way as you would not ask somebody who has had a stroke that has rendered them paralyzed on half the side, you wouldn't tell them, hey, chuck this ball at me. It's the same kind of thing where there are certain things where you need to adjust your expectation, for lack of a better word, of what you're demanding or expecting as a response from someone who has an actual brain injury and a brain illness. And I'll go into sort of the detail about what exactly is the deterioration and how it impacts very things that you need to be able to do on a functional on a basis to be functional, so to speak. And the universal prevalence rate, and I'll go into much more detail about this prevalence rate factor later on, but the universal prevalence rate is 1 to 2% across populations and history. And this is also another very important thing, because once you go through more of this presentation, you will find out that oh yeah, maybe it's likely that, many people with this condition may not, go on to have kids, etc. So how is it? How is it that, well, and that's not exactly accurate, but um, many people with this condition, if you're going by the Darwinian sort of, people with this condition die at a younger age for various reasons, some of them biological illness wise too. Why is it, or how is it that this 1 to 2% prevalence rate persists across population in history? And I have some theorizations of that, more to do with the metaphysical, more that I may want to pursue in my dissertation. I'm not sure yet. Things to talk about with my advisor, but I digress. So let's go into the symptoms. Okay, what are the symptoms? So the DSM-5, which is like our, clinicians' big book of all things, related to the mind, our Bible, so to speak. The DSM defines this as characterized by 3 groups of symptoms. So there's the positive symptoms, the negative symptoms, and the disorganized symptoms. One thing to note when I say the word positive symptoms, I don't mean something positive as in, i.e. happy is happening. No, positive is an addition to, say, normal mode of being. So for example, delusions and hallucinations, those are additions to what any regular person is, is living in day-to-day life. So delusions are defined as fixed false beliefs. And there are different, there are types of delusions. One is the non-bizarre type and one is a bizarre type. Bizarre is something that's absolutely out of the realm of any possibility. And non-bizarre are actually things that might well be, in some sense, like you can't put, say, someone who has a conspiracy theorist in this category, but it's kind of one of those things where, if you find out later that something was in fact what we thought it wasn't, those are like non-bizarre. And then there's bizarre. Among hallucinations, a hallucination is a perception without stimuli. The most common ones are the auditory hallucinations. In fact, that's kind of how it begins, the hearing voices. And there is actually a hearing voices movement as well that I will talk about a little bit later. Then there are the negative symptoms. Negative meaning a removal of a way of being that is generally accepted. So for example, blunt affect, absolute, like flat affect. Right now, I mean, even though there's no actual person in front of me, I still feel the need to be animated, like I'm talking to you. But in a negative symptom is one where the affect is completely flat, blank, no reaction, no expression, something like that. Avolition is the lack of interest in like actually doing anything, no volition or motivation, so to speak. I will talk about alogia last because it ties in with the disorganized symptoms. Anhedonia is lack of feeling any pleasure. Asociality is the isolation, the not wanting to interact with other people. Alogia, not speaking, not wanting to speak. And the interesting thing here, and I think the clue is in the word itself, logia, logic, thinking, and logia, the word. I think this is absolutely fascinating because it really shows how our brains think while we speak and speak what we think. And that alogia, that absence of that, is what ties in with one of the very core aspects of this disorder. Disorganized symptoms. So there you go, the thoughts, I'm trying to move this bar out of my way because I cannot see my own text here. There we go. The thought disorder because alogia, logic, and speech, and that thinking and thought word gap is what's missing and what's impaired in a way. Loose associations / Broca's area word salad. Now, when something interesting / funny, when I first heard about this, I asked my professor, I'm like, hey, wait a second, loose associations like rambling speech? I'm like, that? Do I have this? And he's like, no, you have DSM-itis, which is what everybody has when they start studying the DSM. Oh, I have that, I have that, I have that. Yeah, no. Loose associations / Broca's area word salad is a very, very different sort of a phenomenon. It's one where, and so Broca's area, Wernicke's area, Broca's area this side, Wernicke's this side, I think. Anyways, but what happens is Wernicke's area takes in the data, so I can understand what you're saying to me. Then what I want to say back to you and the output flow comes out, that's Broca's area. When Broca's area is damaged, the person is desperately trying to say something, but something else is coming out, like God alone knows what is coming out. And it's very frustrating for the patient because they're trying to say something and they can't even like get it together to say something, say what they want to say. And it's frustrating. And it is a function of the Broca's area being damaged. And the other one that's kind of associated with this is grossly disorganized behavior. And by this, I don't mean, gee, I'm not organized, therefore I have this. No, it's again something that's that impairs day-to-day functioning, physical hygiene, those kind of things. So those are some of the symptoms. And here we go. So here's my little note on Broca's area word salad. It's very important to understand. I almost think about a person who has like core schizophrenia, not one of the schizophrenia form things, but the actual schizophrenia. It's very important to ask such a person direct questions that elicit brief and closed-ended answers. As therapists, we are trained to ask open-ended questions, elicit talking from the person. This really backfires when you're working with somebody who has schizophrenia because it can get very frustrating. And I'm going to share a clip from a video here. This is also on YouTube, and I'm going to put in that, whatever the law is, the legal copyright disclaimer thing, because I'm using it strictly for illustration and educational purposes only, but you will see this. But this therapist is asking this girl, she's asking very open-ended sort of things that would be totally fine in regular therapy, but over here, it's just not working out so well, and you'll see that. Here we go.
I never have done that. That.
That's just too open-ended. Too open-ended to ask someone that.
Well, have you ever heard your thoughts broadcast as though they were coming over a loudspeaker or over a television? Like a mic? Like, okay, tell me about that. 2. Mic is 2.
Oh, you see that?
14.
She just said, Mike, tell me about that. Now, it's almost like that went in just fine through Wernicke's, but when it was coming out through brokers, it was like, Mike, let's look through my memory file of my books and my, all my memories in my head. Let me just scan through. Mike is a kid. Mike is 2, but the girl is 14. And so that's what she's saying, because that connection between, microphone, that's the context, that connection is gone. And you can imagine being this person would be very frustrating. Listening to this person might also be, but it wouldn't be if you knew how to ask the right questions. And so I'll take it a little bit further too, you'll see.
Do you feel people put thoughts into your mind?
That was a decent question. Yes, no answer. But if she has delusions, that may be a different thing.
Thought process is eliminated. Now, was woman's active political party?
You can imagine how
Maybe this
frustrated it
person-
is for her. Frustrating
Yellow
it is.
just means wear glasses or spectacles. Has anyone ever put thoughts into your mind?
That's a good question.
Through the television?
I thought that was funny. She said only the television, doesn't it, for all of us? But in any case, this next bit, you'll see sort of the question she asks her and how it goes in a different direction.
Can you tell me about that?
Can
When
you
the
tell me about
television
that?
does
It's too open-ended.
No.
Ah, okay. I stand corrected.
How is the television able to do that? They have very intricate tools. And they can put thoughts into your mind? It's possible. What was happening?
Okay, the bit about they have very intricate tools. The way she asked the question about how does the television do that? In somebody with this condition, it would almost go into, trying to articulate what the television is doing. And unless you're like I don't know what sort of engineer, mechanical engineers make televisions, how would you even know that? So that's a really complicated question to ask somebody with schizophrenia. So asking direct questions that elicit brief, closed-ended answers is very important. And this has life-altering implications, especially in law enforcement. If you have, if as a law enforcement officer, you encounter someone who has schizophrenia and you ask open-ended questions and you get all these words thrown at you that well, I don't know if the cops get scared or not, but if you're getting nervous and then they're getting nervous, it makes it way worse. So simple things. Do you know where you live? Just, yeah, very simple closed-ended questions. So I'll go a little bit into the etiology here. There is quite a bit of genetic concordance through one of the biological theories. They've done things like, twin studies, etc., to identify sort of what the concordance rates are. And there is, heaps of work out there on what percentage of chance do you have if you're related by this degree, by that degree, etc., as the distance increases. However, I do want to point out the work of two folks done separately in two different countries. McCarroll in 2016, I think he was interviewed on PBS or something, and he's written a paper as well. He teaches at Harvard. I don't know if he teaches or he's the head of some department, but in any case, his work, and then it was substantiated or reaffirmed by O'Donovan. Sorry, I have a typo there, D. Donovan, fat finger error, but I don't know how O is there, D is there. Anyways, I'm human. O'Donovan in 2020 gave this lecture in King's College. Both of these things are available on YouTube as well. The interview with Dr. McCarroll and the talk by O'Donovan are both on YouTube. But what they found was that these sort of predispositions may be there, but epigenetics plays quite a bit of a factor in influencing that environmental trigger of gene expression. And I thought that was pretty fascinating too. So I wanted to call that out. Okay, so more of the etiology. Some of the biological theories state that, so one of the reasons, etiology just means origins or reasons for why and how this happens, how this starts, it's a fancy word for that. Neural migration dysfunction in the second trimester. So I won't go much into that anyways, but when a neural migration, when the neural networks do not form properly in the second trimester, something goes amiss. That is one of the predisposing factors. Prenatal viral exposure, sorry, my V's and W's mixed up. I'm Indian, so the V's and W's do get mixed up, or whatever. Winter births, prenatal viral exposure seems to have an impact. So those are all sort of the birth and pre-birth kind of factors. Then there's another one that's called the dopamine hypothesis, which is basically when there's a flood of dopamine in the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, it triggers this psychotic episode. And by the way, you can trigger a psychotic episode in any person by just overdosing on things that produce dopamine, i.e. like stimulants, cocaine, or what else, Adderall, any of the stimulants, if unsupervised and overdosed on, they can give you a dopamine flood and they can induce a psychotic episode. So it's important to bear that in mind. The fix, so to speak, for this and the medications that are given to kind of lower the dopamine, what they do result in is the Parkinson's kind of tremors and shaking. And so what you quite often end up seeing in somebody who's had schizophrenia and survived for a long time is they end up, or not end up, because this happens pretty quickly. They have these Parkinson's type of tremors just out of the medication that is stopping the dopamine, dopamine blockers. So so that's the dopamine hypothesis. And the other one is the glutamate hypothesis, because, and so dopamine up too much, glutamate down. So too less glutamate, what it does is it causes cognitive decline, and it also increases some of the negative symptoms, which is the depression-like symptoms, if you will. And then the last one, this is not quite a biological theory, but it is one of the etiologies. The stress diathesis model is a very fancy technical word of saying the straw that broke the camel's back. That's what it is. It's like that one last thing, is it that causes the crack, so to speak. And I'll go into sort of the course of illness and the prognosis, and that one last straw, might make you think, oh, is it like an older person thing? No, actually, the age of onset is scary, frankly. In males, this happens in the late teens to early 20s. So like right when that college age, the United States college age, the 18 to 22, 23 kind of a time frame is when this happens in boys, and in girls, males, females. In females, it tends to happen later on in the late 20s. Now, the PBS talk that I referenced earlier, that Dr. O'Carroll, the PBS interview that Dr. O'Carroll gave with on PBS, it talks about sort of that the gene that kind of flips on, so to speak, and what it does with the prefrontal cortex that's just developing, and how it just sets off this reaction with dopamine, etc. So it's worth looking into. But the thing is, it's important to note as well that that is that time when that prefrontal cortex is developing in young people, and this is the time when this kicks in. It's like a really awful time, frankly, for something like this to hit you. And I'll go more into the sort of treatment area things later on. But a bit of a teaser, dissertation wise, I am thinking about, we say that this is, a disorder and this and that, but given that it's got a 1 to 2% prevalence rate across history, I wonder if this has something more to do with like a calling, so to speak, but I'll reserve that until I actually do more research on this topic. So how does this begin? So the prodromal, there's like 3 stages, if you will. The prodromal stage rather, is where the negative symptoms are the most salient. They're the most visible. The negative symptoms do look quite a bit like depression. You're not wanting to do anything, not wanting to hang out with anyone, not wanting to, where did I lost my thing? Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay. No, I lost my file. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So the negative symptoms look quite a bit like depression, and and one may think that, this person's just a teenager, they're feeling like this, it's fine, let it be. But then in the active phase, there's this grossly disorganized behavior, thoughts, speech. The auditory hallucinations is what comes out, sort of not first necessarily, but among most of the patients, the auditory hallucinations are the most common one. And that's the reason why among sort of the peer / survivor-led treatments, there's a movement called the Hearing Voices movement that's actually quite empowering for people who have this, or who have maybe like say lighter versions of this, that who can work with things without medication, etc. Then in the active symptoms also comes the the catatonia, the severe underfunctioning in activities of daily living. And these active symptoms, in order to get this diagnosis of quote unquote schizophrenia, these active symptoms have to persist for longer than 1 month. Because when things are less than 1 month, it's called a brief psychotic episode. If they, just happens for a short period of time and then it remits. But when it continues for a longer time, and there have been these prodromals, that's the active phase. And then there's the residual phase, where there are the lingering effects, either the asociality or the blunted affect, or certain things persist or not. And that's at that point is when you either have like the degeneration and like things get worse, or you have recovery. And this is a bit of a rough slide, but I'll share it anyways. It's the rule of thirds. So this diagnosis, schizophrenia, is one of those that falls under the rule of thirds. And what that means is that this is what happens, 1/3 recover with treatment, 1/3 function with ongoing support, and 1/3 either require a very high level of care, or they have premature death, where the premature death / suicide part, the suicide part is kind of the 10% there that is inbred. And I know I've blocked this out into 4 blocks, not 3, and I know that my 3-dimensional picture here doesn't look very 1/3, but just bear with the 3D-ness of the image. It is a 1/3 type of an issue. And now, what does this mean? It's because that's kind of morbid, right? It's like, oh, great, so now I'm doomed. No, you're not doomed, because knowing that, even among that 1/3, knowing that 1/3 of that 1% of the global population requires a high level of care, that might warrant that we, as healthcare providers, as administrators, as, as whatever we do, that we kind of pay some heed to that. It's 1/3 or 1% of global individuals. Like, surely we can do something to increase the level of care that these people get. And they were back to the prevalence rate. So the universal prevalence rate, like I mentioned earlier too, is 1 to 2% across populations and history. But here's the kicker. Persons with schizophrenia are overrepresented among among quote unquote homeless people, or I would rather say among people who lack stable housing, because that's really the key issue, the lacking of the stable housing. Because, I mean, if you just think about sort of here in America, you need, you need a job to have health insurance. If you want medication, where, you have to show your ID has your address. If you don't have an address, if you don't have a home, if you don't have a stable place to live, and how do you get a stable place to live? For your rental/lease agreement, it's tied with your employment. That means you have to have a job. Well, if you have these kind of symptoms that you take medication, and then you have Parkinson's type of, tremors for, where are you working? Are you able to work? So yeah, but that's a different side tangent that soapbox rather, that I go on very readily. So I won't go there today. So they're overrepresented among people who lack stable housing, and they comprise 10% of the homeless persons in the United States. And by the way, 10%, that's a schizophrenia number. The number for people with all other psychotic disorders is, I think, 21 or 22. The data can be found in this paper by Ayano, 2019. Of this percentage, the split between developed nations and developing nations is so 8% of, so they comprise 8% of, so they don't kind of add up to 100. It's 8% of homeless persons in developed nations have schizophrenia. So even over here, you can see that the US is leading, quote unquote. That's not an area we want to be first in, people. But the United States has a higher percentage, of folks who have schizophrenia and who are homeless. And 22% of people without stable housing not 22% of people without stable housing, 22% of the people without stable housing in developing nations have schizophrenia. Not 22% people, but okay. Some of the barriers to treatment are things that you can imagine. If as a patient, if you yourself are a little bit suspicious about the system, and that's like a factor that's kind of undergirding everything, and then you have lack of support from the society and people who don't understand what is going on with this condition that you have, and then you don't have stable housing and health insurance and and a place to live and family support, etc., and you're hardly in your 20s. It lends itself to this vicious web of interaction, and I kind of I was going to make it like I was going to draw out a sort of a spiral, but in fact it was not a spiral in my view. I felt like it really was like this honeycomb web, because each factor kind of bleeds in and amplifies the other factors. So for example, you have the symptoms, you have the loss of employment, you have the loss of health insurance, you try to self-medicate, maybe you lose your job again, you're homeless, then the addiction kind of sets in. There's a loss of social connection with the loss of employment, the loss of, and then sort of feeding into the symptoms again further. So So it all kind of ties in together. Now on that medication, self-medication and addiction bit, I do want to say something about self-medication and tobacco. Because, and I listened to this wonderful talk by Dr. Steinberg, and it's on the SAMHSA YouTube channel here. That it was a brilliant lecture. But the thing that is most pertinent and poignant really is that compared with non-smokers with schizophrenia, smokers with schizophrenia experience up to 12 times the risk of a cardiac-related death. Now, if you bear in mind that someone with schizophrenia, just because of, and I'm blanking on the word, but there's an area of the brain that kind of, it gets bigger and then it blocks the blood supply from other areas, etc. Why am I blanking on that name of that? Anyways, so if you bear in mind that a person with schizophrenia is likely to, even if they die a natural death, they do not commit suicide, they still tend to live about 15 years shorter lifespan, than the general population. So if you amplify that with smoking, and you realize that they have a 12 times higher risk for cardiac related death, like why? I mean, there's plenty of problems already. You don't need to add tobacco into this mix. To add to that, cancer incidence is 2.6 times higher in those with schizophrenia than those without. And additionally, and I thought this was the former finance person, because I used to be a finance person, and now I'm getting my doctoral in psychology in my middle age, my second career. So this was fascinating to me. Those with serious mental illness, that's what SMI stands for, those with serious mental illness and on public assistance spend over 30% of their income on tobacco. To put that in context, the general population spends 30% of their income on housing, on your rent, your mortgage, or whatever it is. That's kind of the split income wise. And so to think about it, that they were literally burning away a third. So now I'll go over sort of some of the treatments. The gold standard evidence-based treatments are family psychoeducation for schizophrenia. And I'll go in more detail later, but assertive community treatment for schizophrenia, illness management and recovery, which actually works really well in combination with the previous one with assertive community treatment, and acceptance and commitment therapy for psychosis. And note it's a psychosis, not schizophrenia, but you can treat people with the milder forms of schizophrenia. So with that, family psychoeducation is very long-standing, it's evidence-based, it's got the most longitudinal and empirically supported data. It's been adopted internationally. It has been adapted to developing countries to be culturally congruent and to match the needs of a particular culture. There are benefits for both patients as well as their support network, because a lot of times, you may be treating the person, but then, the context in which they live, that environment too needs more education, more healing, more support on how to do, what do I do, etc. And so the official sessions, they are kind of structured, manualized for 12 structured sessions. However, the families tend to continue the networks offline anyways. And that's how it is in the United States. In other countries where, you're not really tied to the insurance thing of like a certain number of sessions, etc., that may not be the case. It might not need to be so like unstructured or off grid, so to speak. Assertive community treatment for schizophrenia. I saw a video done by somebody in Vancouver. It was really good. Also on YouTube. And this, it sounds really good. It's customized, individualized care. It supports the clients independent living in a community setting. You have a psychiatrist on call, you have a psychologist on call, you have social workers, you have like a nice team supporting you. And because of that, you have a low ratio of healthcare professional to patient to client. But the problem is that it's also very expensive. And in countries where it's sort of taken from other funds, etc., it diverts funding from other programs that kind of may have a more broad stroke and may apply to more people. It kind of takes funding from that and puts it here. That's one of the hiccups with it, you'd say. However, if it could be, hey, we're printing money, right? Why can't we print some money and like make this happen on a more kind of proper scale, kind of bigger scale? But I don't do that anymore. Illness management and recovery is another really, really good method because it focuses also on psychoeducation, on cognitive behavioral therapy approaches, medication adherence, relapse prevention, social skills developing, coping skills training. And when it is used in connection with that, a sort of community treatment kind of modality, IMR shows better improvement in illness management and the patient's attitude towards the medication and building insight. And when I say building insight, what I mean is that, so in psychology, we don't use the word insight the way, we use it in like layperson's terms. In layperson's terms, you think insight, blah, enlightenment, close to enlightenment, and like, oh, wonder, and like, you're so insightful, etc. No, that's not what it means when we use the word insight in the clinical and psychology context. Insight means, do you know that what you're doing is dysfunctional or not? So poor insight means, no, I'm pretty sure that's the person talking to me right there. This is not a hallucination. That's poor insight. That's not, this entity that's speaking to me right now is giving me all this wonderful guidance. I'm so insightful. No, it's not that. So that's what I mean when I say that it shows better improvement in building insight and in the reduction of negative symptoms, which is like the more depressive type of symptoms. This last one among the EBT, the evidence-based psychotherapy modalities, the last one is acceptance and commitment therapy. This works better for people who are quote unquote higher functioning and who are, so acceptance commitment therapy, for those who don't know what it is, it's a very actually Buddhist way of you're not fighting it, you're not indulging in it, you're just you're working on your relationship with the thoughts, with the voices, with whatever it is. Even in pain management, if you have a pain somewhere, it's like, instead of fighting it, you're just gonna like accept your relationship with that pain. If you can't sleep at night, it's a wonderful thing. ACT is a wonderful thing to try. If you can't get sleep, it's like, oh, okay, well, I cannot sleep, so I'm just going to enjoy the feel of my covers. And before you know it, you're fast asleep. So it's that's kind of what ACT is. But so as you can imagine, it has better sort of success rate with somebody who is already high functioning and already has some basis like with reality. And I use the word reality, I'll say this. In the old days, schizophrenia, and that's is a kind of, it's persisted to today, where people misunderstand and think the word schiz is like a cut, right? It's a schism, it's a break. And people are split, more like it. So people think, oh, it's the split personality. No, that is multiple. It's not called multiple personality disorder in the big book. It's called dissociative identity disorder, meaning you've dissociated your identity and you have different, versions. But that's very rare actually. So this thing, this schism is not a split personality. It is a split from reality, whatever that means. I won't go there. Well, I'm actually going there right now. Among the peer and survival-led resources, there's the Hearing Voices movement, the Icarus Project, the Spiritual Emergence Network, Stand Up for Mental Health, which is a comedy stand-up type group, and Crazy Wise, this organization. I first chanced upon this speaker, Phil Borges, on one of the TED Talks. Both his TED Talks, or maybe even more now, I don't know. But his TED Talks are on YouTube. You should definitely check it out. He talks about how, in indigenous cultures, there are these, people who've had this, they've heard voices, they've, in this culture, in Western culture, it's a break with reality, etc. But the way it's regarded in these other cultures, in the more indigenous cultures that are kind of more more plugged in with the, with the universe, so to speak, they regard this really as a spiritual calling. And what they do then is they send off this boy, usually it's a young man, right? So they'll send off this boy to hang out with this older man who's gone through this and who's emerged from it, and I think that is so powerful in terms of, even in terms of like an older man with schizophrenia having like this refound purpose to kind of help guide, this younger person into this path of like, oh, this is what's going on with you. And emerging, so to speak, in that way. Now, there are some foods that help. So since this is a brain illness, it's really important to feed the brain foods that are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, like all these guys, walnuts and avocados and salmon. Is it salmon? I think it's salmon. But yeah, almonds, beetroots, oranges, tomatoes, and wheatgrass. So these are some foods that help. It's also very important from the mood perspective to make sure, the refined sugar is always a bad idea. That's, I think, across the board. You don't have to have schizophrenia to skip out on the sugar. But refined sugars will, cause a spike in your blood sugar and your mood, make you very euphoric, and then crash. Down you come. So you want to avoid foods that lend to those ups and downs. You want to kind of keep it, low glycemic, but yet nutritious, wholesome, and brain foods. And I cannot help but share these two quotes from one of my favorite monks, Sajjan Brahm, from the Buddhist Society of Western Australia, who is just a wonderful, wonderful, kind monk. And he is one of his famous stories that he shares is the story of the 2 bad bricks. And he says, yeah, I can see the 2 bad bricks, but I can also see the 998 good bricks. And so it's important to see the person in the full context, not just the 2 bad bricks, just the hallucinations, just the delusions, just the distortions, but the whole context. And and also this other quote: the real home is not the house you live in, but the stillness and the peace in your heart. And on that note, I feel like it's really important to understand that person in context, the whole context. What is the person like? What are their individual risk factors? What are their protective factors? We as clinicians, we focus quite a bit on risk factors, but I think it's really important to focus on a person's protective factors. Are they, were they did they have like a very high IQ or something? What's their family system like? What do they love to do? Are they spiritual? Do they have, did they have some like religious practices that they used to do? Are there certain, friends that care about them deeply and can help? What is their symptom severity? that's also very important in terms of, to medicate or not to medicate. Because here's the other, the problem, and I'm sure medical doctors who may watch this or may listen to this may disagree with me on this. But medication, the medications thus far serve the positive symptoms, i.e. the delusions and hallucinations. However, for many people with schizophrenia, those are not the symptoms that bother them as much. And I'm saying many, not all, because some, just cannot, they need it. I'm not saying, go off your meds. That's a disclaimer. I am not saying that, and I'm a student. So just whatever I say, just take it with a grain of salt, okay? But most patients with schizophrenia say that the positive symptoms are not what bothers them. What bothers them the most is the cognitive decline that they experience as part of their illness. And that is not something that we've been able to find a medication for. So it's very important to bear that in mind, because anyways, always talk to your psychiatrist and get professional counsel. But never mind, I went off on a tangent. The person in context, the individual, right? What is unique to them, what they're bringing to the table, right? What's their social network like? What is their family structure? What is their housing situation? What is their support network? Are they employed? Are they employable? Can they be employed? Who are the healthcare providers? Do they have empathy? Are they getting what they need from the healthcare providers? And then in that context, to think about the treatment, whether it is family psychoeducation, whether it is, that sort of community treatment, like communal living kind of not communal living exactly, independent living within a fixed block sort of a thing. And whether it's ACT, whether it's illness management and recovery, and that's what made it, whether it's peer-led or survival-led resources. What the heck, I'll keep going, because I was wondering whether I should stop, but this video's gone on way too long. But if it's gone on too long, feel free to turn it off, and it's all good. I won't take offense. Thought I'd go over some myth versus fact type of exercise. So now we were meeting in person, or if I was sharing this deck with you guys, like on a PowerPoint, on a thing, I would, the next line, I would ask you all, so is this true? People with schizophrenia are dangerous? And then I would click the clicker and this one would come in flying in. False. People with schizophrenia are actually more likely to be victims of violence rather than perpetrators. And the reason for that is because of, that Broca's area word salad. If they're not understood properly, if they say something off that they didn't mean to say, it's just what came out. Things might happen. They may not be so well treated. Again, another myth versus fact. If you want to understand a person with schizophrenia, ask closed-ended brief questions. Yes, that is true. Broca's area, the Broca's area damage to a person with schizophrenia renders their language pattern hard to follow. As law enforcement, particularly, ask direct closed-ended questions so as to orient the person and not to further victimize an ill person. Another one. In the prodromal part of the illness, the negative symptoms are the most salient. Yes, that is true. The lead up to the psychotic event is often marked with those 5 A's. So just keep an eye out. It may not be like, especially for young people, keep an eye out on depression-like things. Another myth versus fact. People with schizophrenia are more likely to come from a low socioeconomic status background. Persons of color are more prone to having schizophrenia. Is that true or false? False. And I may get some argument / pushback in the comments on this one, because there are some research papers that state that persons of color have more propensity or have more incidences. But in fact, there are also countering papers that say that persons of color are diagnosed with schizophrenia at a higher rate. And that's a huge difference. To say that somebody has this versus they're diagnosed at a higher rate. Yeah. Also, persons with lower socioeconomic status backgrounds, they often lack the financial means to address their symptoms early on and to address their mental health needs. To a large extent, even today, therapy is considered, a bit of a luxury, so to speak, which is one of the reasons I'm wanting to make these and make more of these sort of videos, to increase people's awareness. You may not be able to afford therapy, but if you watch a free video on YouTube and you learn something or you learn to take better care of yourself, like you. So there you go. Another myth versus fact. Okay, yeah. Persons with schizophrenia live shorter lifespans than those without schizophrenia. And this unfortunately is true. I was actually very surprised because, as I mentioned, I have a finance background. I don't have much like a biomedical type of background. So I did not, when I heard that people with schizophrenia live shorter lifespans, I thought, oh, is it because they kill themselves? And my professor was the one, thank God, educated me on this, that no, it's actually the differences in the brain and the lack of, again, I'm blanking on that darn word and it'll come to me as soon as I hit pause on this recording. But these two structures in the brain, they go up and they're larger in people with schizophrenia. And what that happens is, what that causes is poor blood supply to the brain. And, and that's actually why in the way old days, in the early 1900s, this was called dementia precox, is what it was called. Basically like a premature progressive degenerating dementia. I think that was actually a good, accurate word for this condition, because that is in fact what it is. It's like faster brain decay. It's like Alzheimer's on steroids, so to speak. So unfortunately, even after ruling out suicide as cause of death, persons with schizophrenia have biological differences. And thank you. I'm so glad I wrote this. Oh yes, there's the word, ventricles. Their ventricles enlarge. If I just read my own slides, I will know the answers to everything in the universe. Okay, I'm going to read this out. Even after ruling out suicide as cause of death, persons with schizophrenia have biological differences in the brain structure that cause the gray matter to turn white at a faster rate, as well as ventricles that enlarge that cause the brain to age at a faster rate because there's less oxygen getting to it. And with that, my invitation to all of you, stay kind. So thank you all for listening, for being here. If you made it this far, if you got any value out of it, feel free to hit like or to rate, I should say, like or dislike, to share, to subscribe, to comment if you want me to explore any different conditions. And May 24th, World Schizophrenia Awareness Day. Take care. Bye.